Welcome to Vintage Drums Talk. Jim Messina is my name. I'm glad you've come to the interviews page because we are in the midst of a terrific interview today. A very important person is on the line here with me today. Something I've been very excited about for about 2 years, trying to get him to come and talk to me. Folks, we're talking to Roger North today, the creator of North Drums that some of you may or may have not seen, but you're going to know by the end of this interview. If you're going to watch the whole series, you're going to know all about how it all went down. Roger, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well.
Terrific. Why don't we continue on with our story? Now, where we left off was we were talking about the early days of producing this innovative shell, and we came up to the point where you had made your first production set using crude hardware and some of the stuff that you made yourself, and making the stands out of the rack out of galvanized pipe. So let's pick it up from there. And you moved on, right? You got the quality better and better. You had 3 or 4 employees working with you. You were in the old barn. How fast did production pick up? Were the orders coming in, or what did you have to do to start actually selling these drums, this concept?
Well, originally I just took them to some music stores in Portland because that's the only outlet I had directly. I took them down to a place called Don Worth's Drum Shop, and Don Worth's son actually still has a drum shop here.
Uh-huh.
And he was excited about them. He put them in his window, and I think he sold that first set eventually. But, I was kind of working with that, and in the meantime, I was starting to think about showing them to musicians that came into town to play. And my wife actually made the first sale, which she went down, and I was out of town, I think, gigging somewhere with the Rounders, and she took a drum down to a concert that Boz Skaggs was playing in town, and whose drummer actually was an old friend of mine in Boston named Rick Schlosser.
Mm-hmm.
And she took a little, I think she took like a little drum down there, an 8-inch drum or something, and showed it to Rick and to them. And Boz Skaggs himself actually ended up saying, "Well, I want some of those. I want 3 of those toms." So he bought a set of like a 8, 10, and 12-inch tom set. And I don't know what he did with them. I don't even know if he plays drums, but that was kind of that was rewarding. And but then not too long after that, Billy Cobham was in town playing a show, and at that time he had his own band. He was the Billy Cobham band.
Well, to jump in here,
I think he was playing with George Duke maybe, and Alphonso Johnson or somebody like that. Really great band.
I just watched a video of him with George Duke, and he had 2 yellow giant ones. How did that happen? I mean, he actually bought some from you, right?
Yeah, well, I went down. I knew he was in town, and I didn't know him, but I knew he was a great drummer, and so I went down to the Paramount Theater where he was playing in the afternoon in hopes, and I brought a drum down there. I think it was maybe a 10-inch tom or something. Brought a single drum, and I went down and in hopes of just seeing if he was interested in the idea and everything, because it really wasn't out in the public yet. And so I went down there, and he was not there. The band was setting up, but he was not there yet. And so I was hanging around backstage, and I ended up I set the drum up on I just stuck it on one of the amplifiers.
Now, how was it that you were allowed to go up on stage like that? I mean,
well, it was in the afternoon, so I talked my way in there,
I think times were different then. You had less security and all that stuff.
It was a little bit easier then.
Yeah, okay.
And I can't remember. I may have known some of the people. I mean, Portland is not a huge town, so the music people kind of all know each other.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but I did get backstage, and but I was on the stage, and talking to people, and I just set the drum on its upside down on its head on the amplifier, so it's sitting there like one of those air scoops on a ship.
Right.
And because I didn't want to carry it, and eventually Billy came in, and he walked on stage, and he saw the drum, and he just like, I still remember him. He just focused on it, and he went over to it. He literally walked in a circle around the amplifier, looking at this thing, going, "What is that?" It's obviously a drum. And then he's kind of scratching his head, and he picked it up, and he hit it with his finger, and it had a nice deep tone, and he goes, "Whoa!"
Yeah.
And so then when I went over and talked to him, and told him the story and everything, and he says, "Well, God, I want a set. He didn't, to his credit, he didn't ask me to give him a free set or anything like that. He says, I want to buy a set. How much are they?" And so I said, well, I don't know. I came up with a price. It wasn't very much. It was just, $300 or $400. He just wanted a set of 3 toms, I think it was.
Now, so far we've got Boss Skaggs that wanted only toms. Now we've got Billy Cobham only toms.
Right.
Nobody's really going for, or maybe they don't know that the bass drums were available.
Nobody's going for a full set yet. No. But anyway, I eventually I made a set for him. He picked a color. I think they were white on the outside, black on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
I made him the drums and sent them to him in New York, and that's really when things kind of took off. I mean, he was a big name at the time. He was kind of at the peak of his notoriety, and people really respected him. And so he would tell people at drum shops in New York and San Francisco and here and there. And so all of a sudden, I started getting calls from all these stores saying, we want to sell these drums, and here I am. I think I was still working in the barn.
I was just going to ask you, are you still in that rickety barn?
I think so. I'm pretty sure I was still in the barn. So I'm getting swamped with orders, and I'm saying, okay, well, the stores would call up and say, I want 6 sets. And I say, well, can't do it. Sorry, can't do it, but I'll do the best I can.
Okay, when they're saying sets, are they saying I want drum sets, bass drums, toms, or just I want a set of toms?
No, everything, full sets.
They're calling a set. Okay, now
they would call, and I would say, well, I have full sets. I have kick drums and everything. So
okay. You had no catalogs,
and at that time, people started asking for a snare drum too. And I said, well, there is no snare drum. So that's kind of where that concept.
Speaking of the snare drum,
came from,
I did see that on the internet today that you actually did design a snare drum with the North concept, and tell me about that. How did that go?
Well, I did what I could. I mean, obviously, it needed a head on the front with a snare, and I wanted it to be elbow shaped, and so I couldn't really put a flare on it, but I could make it elbow shaped, and so it would project. And it just wasn't. It ended up being like a really deep snare drum, to get the curve in it and everything. I made a 14-inch top head and a 14-inch front head, and strung the snares across the front head, and used it a bit myself first just to see what it was like, and I just wasn't crazy about it. I mean, for one thing, the snares were on a head that was vertical, and so of course all the particularly bass amplifiers put out a lot of vibrational energy that basically is vibrating horizontally, and the head is vertical, so the head is picking up the bass vibrations way more than a like a normal snare drum head would, which they buzz anyway. But this drum buzzed even worse because of its orientation. So it was getting a lot of buzzing and rattling from the snare head due to the bass and electric guitar sounds. And the other thing was there was such a deep drum, and the head was projecting all this snare drum sound forward, but not much was coming back to the drummer, So
Right.
it actually didn't sound very crisp or anything from the drummer's point of view. So it just wasn't, a great fit. And thinking back on, nowadays, like if you see the fife and drum or the bagpipe drummers from
Right.
Scotland, they have the snare drums they're deep, but they have a snare under the top head too, and
Yes.
for that same reason. And so I probably could have done something like that, but I had so much else going on that I just kind of felt like the snare drum is just another thing that I don't really want to tackle at this point. So I made a few snare drums, but I didn't sell very many of them, and for good reason.
Yeah. I did read some reviews about it. I think someone from Brit was talking about it, and they came up with their own assessment of why that didn't work, but it just had to do with the head being
I
vertical.
did it because people were asking for it, saying, "Well, what about
sure.
a snare drum now?" That's the way it works. You put something out there, and people kind of project the next step, and and that's good. But in this case, it was for one thing, I was swamped with just trying to meet orders.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of things going on. But
what's interesting what's interesting is that what we do here at VintageDrumsTalk.com, it's all vintage oriented. So a snare drum, a North snare drum, would be considered a highly collectible drum because it didn't work out.
Right.
The same reason
there's a few
knob,
of them out there. I don't know where they are, but there are a few of them out there.
and I'll bet they would be highly sought after because we have the drums, made by the Leedy and Ludwig company that were knob tension drums that were a total failure. They didn't work out. Highly collectible now because only there weren't very many made, and that's kind of what it's like when you're collecting things. The rarity makes things expensive and desirable, but at least you had to try that. And I can see that the 14-inch floor tom it's the same dimensions, right, as the snare.
Yeah,
that's what you use, right?
It's basically there is a 14-inch floor tom that's like the snare drum. There's also a 14-inch floor tom that has the open end with the flare and everything.
Yeah.
So that one is not the snare drum. That was designed as a floor tom, and that one actually worked okay.
Okay, so now we have a picture here of a very rare set. There are only two that you made, right? We've got a double-headed set here that I believe you still have the toms, don't you?
Right. Well, yeah, that set came about because Doug Clifford, who had been I think Creedence Clearwater had broken up by that time, but he was the drummer for Creedence Clearwater Revival, and he had seen some North drums in a music store down in Oakland, I think it was, where he lived down there in the Bay Area, and he bought a couple of sets of, or maybe not. I think what he did is he called me up and he ordered a couple of two sets of sort of standard North drums, and they were like yellow on the outside and white on the inside. And it was great. He bought two sets. He was really excited about it. In fact, he came up to Portland specifically to go through my shop, which by that time I was out of the barn. I was in a kind of a more acceptable manufacturing facility. But Doug came up and he stayed at my house and we hung out for a couple of days and he toured the shop and everything, and we kind of figured out what drums he wanted and everything. So I made this set of yellow drums him. And in fact, at one point, I was telling him, yeah, God, I'm just like struggling here. I don't have any capital and this and that. And, he kind of hinted around that, well, we wouldn't want you to not have capital, and looking back on it now, I probably should have said, well, listen, let's partner up here.
Yeah, let's collaborate.
You've got some money, and I've got some technology and and this idea, But at the time, I just wasn't ready to do that.
Okay.
So, which probably was a big mistake. But anyway, he had a lot of interest, and he was very supportive. So we kept in touch, and a while after that, probably a year or two after that, he after MTI had started, after I had licensed the patent to MTI, he called up and he says, "Well, I'm in this band now that's kind of doing more jazzy stuff, and I don't want the real loud North drums. Can you make me a set of sort of North concept drums, but that have heads on the front?"
Mm-hmm.
And he paid me a reasonable amount of money, not a lot of money, but he said, I'll finance it.
Well, speaking of, I
just
going
want
to
you
ask
to make a set for me, and I said, okay, I can do that, and I've got time and I've got the facility, so I made him this set of double-headed North drums, and there's this small set, two toms, the smaller tom has a 10-inch head on top, and I believe it's an 11-inch head on the bottom, on the front, and the other one is a 12-inch and a 13-inch head. So there's a little flare to it, but the idea is that there's a tunable head on both sides.
How did you get an 11-inch
more
hoop?
resonant. It doesn't have the sort of blasting tone of the single-headed drums.
Yeah.
More resonant, more kind of jazzy sound.
Where did you get an 11-inch hoop? I'm surprised because they're usually 10, 12.
I found one somewhere.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So
I don't know. I could be wrong. It could be 10 and 12. I don't remember.
So,
but it seems to me that there was an odd size in there, so I think it might be an 11-inch hoop that I managed to find somewhere.
So the set we're looking at here is Doug Clifford's set?
Yeah.
Okay, and you have the other one.
I made that for him.
And you made one for yourself.
At the time, I also made a set for myself, just because I was thinking, well, he's got one, I got to have one.
Oh, of course.
And I just kind of put them away, and as it turns out, I've been using those drums for the last 15 years.
The whole set, or just the toms?
The toms. And I'm actually using the very first 22-inch kind of standard North drum, kick drum.
Yeah, now you told me you've been using that, and that it's changed over the years. Tell them what happened to it.
Well, yeah, I changed the head on it for the first time in kind of a long time, just a couple of weeks ago, and I was really surprised to see. Back then, when I made those very first drums, I wasn't very good at the fiberglass stuff, and I was struggling with the concept of making drums that are finished on both sides, So there, as it turns, it's hard to explain, but as it turns out, there was not a whole lot of actually glass in the shell of that kick drum, and it's mostly resin. It's mostly polyester resin. And over the years, that drum has been under, it's had the tension rods pulling the head down against the shell and kind of trying to squish the shell. And when I took the head off, the shell had actually bulged out to about twice its thickness between the lug and the rim from being compressed all those years. It's been a long time. It's an old drum. It's been kicked around too. There's big long cracks in it and everything, but it still sounds great. So I just put a new head on it, and it still sounds good. But it's kind of like the stories you hear about window glass that fit in the windows for many, many years, it kind of flows down and it's like thicker at the bottom and really thin at the top. And
Right.
this drum has kind of done that same sort of deformation over the years. It's really pretty. I was very surprised to see it.